Any questions? Commissioner Malone?
I see that the highway fund, the fund balance will go down. In a given year, how much does John expend out of the highway? It's just under 10 million, right?
I didn't do it.
Well, budget is expense.
Yeah.
9194.
Right. And he may spend significantly more than that, but it could be state aid. So
the point, I guess, is that there's a reserve fund balance of about 6.6 when the annual expenditure is about 9.1 or 9.2. So from a percentage standpoint, that's still a healthy fund.
his reserve balance is much healthier than the general funds. Yes, sir, that is true. I alluded to this when I was talking about the half penny, and I know that's hard to see up there. It's probably hard to see on your handout too. But this is the maintenance of effort calculation, and what the highway department has is it's a 5-year moving average. And the local funding, which consists of property taxes, some pilot, some interest, a portion of business tax, bank excise tax, investment income, those local items which are specified, that 5-year average, your budget has to exceed what his 5-year average is. And so what we have is 4 years of actual, and well, actually, 4 years of actual, and the current year is a projection. So there's 4 years of actual and 1 year of good guesstimate, if you will. And then whatever that average turns out to, which is $5,070,000 here in this projection column, which is the moving average, for those of you over here. When we project out his FY22 revenue numbers, we're looking at $5,082,000 of revenue, which gives him a little bit of cushion. So we're not, we're not concerned that we're going to run into a maintenance of effort issue in the current year. So there's your highway fund. Next fund, debt service, and of course we have two funds. We have a general debt service, and then we have a rural debt service. The rural debt service fund came about because we actually, back when the BEP was revised to provide for capital reimbursements, prior to 2016 or maybe 17, the BEP didn't fund capital needs of school systems. Well, they changed that, and they provided, within the BEP formula, they provided for capital. Well, this was at the same time that the schools had some capital needs, so we were able to go out to the market and borrow some funds which were repaid strictly by the BEP funding to the schools, okay, which essentially eliminated a sharing component. If we borrow money for education, we have to share that, okay? But if education is paying for the debt, then it's rural debt, and so that's what we have in our rural debt service. Our general debt service fund, well, here's the two fund balances. We run the principal payments on the rural debt service. Principal and interest payments run about $256,000 a year, and there's a $260,000 payment revenue to offset that. Our debt service, we're based on the pennies that were appropriated to debt service, translates into $13,783,000 of revenue this next year. And our debt service payments, including escrow fees and whatnot that the people that are holding the debt require, is $13,182,000. Of that, almost $8 million of it will be principal retirement, which is about what we retired this year, and another $5.5 million, almost $5.5 million, is interest on that outstanding debt. And we're still, we're still scheduled to not have it to be debt-free based on our current payments, 2037, 2038. as we get closer to the Jonesboro project, because that will become essentially debt, more than likely, given the new accounting rules and whatnot. We'll take a look at really what that debt-free date looks like at that point.
Mitch, what is our Moody's S&P rating right now?
We are still at AA2.
And when will we have our next review? Do you know?
We just had one in the last 60 days, I believe. Yeah. Is that, yeah,
March.
yeah,
I think it was March.
Okay.
yeah. Maybe, maybe, yeah. So it'll be, up in 2022 sometime, Commissioner. And again, apologize for the size of the font. Trying to cram 25 pounds into a 5-pound bag, I'm afraid. But this is a schedule of our outstanding debt, and you can see in this column here where we actually retired, I guess it was $7.7 million in the principal due column. But one of the main reasons that I bring this slide to your attention is the shaded column. We do have some debt that is going to be callable after July 1st, and it's about $2.4 million worth of debt. And retiring that debt early with debt service reserves would end up saving the debt service fund somewhere in the neighborhood of about $160,000 over 3 years.
Is that callable by us or by the bondholder?
It's callable by us. I mean, it's not an advance refunding. I mean, it is a straight up call. That now, of course, we would, we'd have to call it the bondholder to. So let's see what else is on there. And this schedule is a schedule of the projection of our debt service reserve. And this does reflect, the budget does not reflect the call of that debt, that $2.4 million of debt. This schedule does. And so should the county call that outstanding debt in FY22, you would see that your ending fund balance would be 5.9, and after the reserve restriction, it'd be just a little over $1 million. So you're meeting your policies. There's the 5.9. This has this debt service right here is where the call is, and then as you can see, the large deficit that hits, and then boom, you're out.
Did you express differently, if I understand what you're saying correctly, all of that prepayment of that debt could come out of the debt service fund without even impacting the general fund?
That is correct, exactly. That's exactly right. Debt service fund is designed to retire all of its debt, so, yeah.
And still leave us well within a cushion.
With a reserve and having a debt service, yeah, that's what we. Okay. Okay, general purpose school fund and central cafeteria fund. Now the only thing that the commission can do is up or down. They either accept it or they send it back, which is, so what you're seeing is their second iteration that came before the budget committee. And so where that runs, and again, pull this from that first schedule we looked at, you can see where the FY22 budget numbers are going to fall based on best estimates at this time in their budget. General purpose school funds, $14.7 million, budgeted revenue of 71.8, budgeted expense of 76.2, which leaves you a fund balance at the end of FY22 of right at a little over $10 million. There's a 3% restriction there, so, the legal restriction, so that means you've got the reserve in excess of, any kind of legally restricted numbers. And then you can see the school nutrition fund down there. It usually stays pretty level. One of the things the school did do this year was actually move, the general purpose school fund used to pay the health insurance for the nutrition folks, and now they've moved all those dollars into the school nutrition fund, which will require this over the next couple of years. The general cafeteria funds aren't self-sufficient. They're not enterprise-making funds, so there will need to be transferred in all likelihood from the general purpose school fund to the nutrition fund. There were some questions about, well, so how does their budget impact their fund balance? And so what you have in front of you here is their total fund balance in the general purpose school fund going back to FY15 and coming forward to FY21, which is what we're projecting, the 14 million, and then back down to a little over 10 million in FY22. There are major revenue items, budget increases, budgetary increases in the revenue items. You can see there. They budgeted $16 million for sales tax, which was about $300,000 more than what their budget was this last year. And I will reiterate that it's a budgeted number. Their property tax budget was for the FY22 is $12.9 million, which is, property tax is bringing in all kinds of money, which is $124,000 of additional dollars this year. So, I mean, it's just, property tax is just a very low growth, low revenue generator. You don't get much from year to year. BEP estimate was probably a little stronger than what was thought it might be 3 or 4 months ago, which is good. And then their major expenditure items, the employee compensation and benefits, and as you all know, they've approved a 4% salary increase along with their 1% step increase for employees, and they've added some positions, and rightfully so, which brings their total recurring expenses that they're going to be adding to their budget up to $3.2 million. I alluded to the transfer of expenses to dietary and health insurance. Those were monies that have moved out and now are in the dietary budget. Because of the increase in the BEP, they have some increase in their contribution to University High, which you can see right there. The school board is strongly supports the enhancement of career technical education. So you can see a $250,000 increase in funding for CTE, and then there's because what this is going to do, that 1.178. Let me jump forward here. What that 1.178 is for is right here. What did their budget expenditures do from year to year? And so you'll actually see budgeted expenditures are going to go up $1.1 million, but that's the result of these recurring and one-time expense changes in the current year, from the current year. For example, there was roughly $1.7 million of one-time expenses in FY21. And so those aren't being repeated next year, but they are being replaced, if you will, by recurring expenses inside as far as compensation, which is well-deserved for all the teachers of the Washington County school system. So that's the general purpose school fund. You've got a schedule of the school nutrition fund in your packet. That's generally in and out. Caitlin, what's her last name now? Caitlin? Yep. Caitlin, I mean, she's been on board 4 years? Correct? 4.5, but has really done a remarkable job, you know, with the school nutrition, with the cafeteria fund, the food service. So, and their people worked really, during the COVID, during this last year, they were troopers and getting out there on the front line, making sure kids were fed during the year when they weren't in school, which was important. Okay, any questions on school fund, general purpose, or cafeteria? All right, here's the big daddy. All right, general fund, and we've already looked at what the fund balance is going to do. What these next few slides show you is really what the changes are in our general fund budgeted revenues year over year and our general fund budgeted expenses year over year. And the top half here actually shows those items that were one-time charges in our budget in FY21. The first one being, of course, a transfer from debt service and capital projects. If you'll remember, we had a pretty good hole last year that we filled by transferring funds from capital projects and debt service. We didn't have to use it, okay? So we did not make those transfers. So, and we have not budgeted for that type of transfer this next year, so that has fallen off. We also received, as you well know, $1.9 million in CARES money through the state, which you all budgeted the revenue and budgeted the expenditures, and you'll see where those drop out on the next slide. But those were the two big items from FY21 that are falling off. What are we dropping in FY22? Okay, what's new? Well, we got a little bit of a property tax increase, or not, excuse me, property tax revenue increase. We're not increasing taxes. We've got a little bit of revenue increase on property tax of $258,000. As some of you may have heard, there has been a proposal to move $3 million back into the general fund from the second half of the local option sales tax. In Tennessee, we have a local option sales tax of 2.25%, 2.5%. Of that, the first half by statute goes to schools. Okay, so 1.25% goes to schools, and it's split between schools based on the ADA. Somewhere back in the history of Washington County in 1990, it was exactly, Washington County committed 100% of its sales tax to schools, which meant that whole 2.5% was split between Washington County and Johnson City. Where we are today in the budget is that in order to find some cover for to look at the balancing of the revenues across the county as a whole, that local option sales tax, that second half that normally falls to the local jurisdiction, the municipality. Johnson City's rules are the same thing. Their half of the sales tax all goes into the Johnson City General Fund. Jonesboro, their second half of sales tax all goes into the Jonesboro Fund, their general fund. And so what Washington County is doing, or what has been proposed, is what about every other county, probably every other county in the state is doing, is that the second half of that sales tax falls back into county government.
I think it's important there to look at you've been kind enough to share the resolution from back then. I think you ought to share the reason that they did that. It was not a decision to do that in perpetuity for schools. It was the budget that year was out of balance, and they did it to balance the budget. Is that correct? That
is the way that resolution reads. Yes, sir. Yep. And we can get a copy of the resolution out to all of y'all if you need it. But yeah. Yep. I'm going to, yep. Oh, sorry.
What would that do to our schools?
What would that do to our schools?
Financially.
budgetary-wise, it doesn't do anything.
Okay.
I mean, their budget, this does not impact their budget at all. Okay.
What effects does it have on the schools?
Well, it would move some money out of it. If you go back to, Danny, what it would do is move this number right here, which is their fund balance, it would bring it down a little more rapidly. Because whatever they receive over and above their budget simply falls back to their fund balance.
Well, you say rapidly, would it be sustainable?
Well, give me a timeline. I mean, how long? I mean, what's sustainable? 2 years, 10 years?
Well, I don't think we're ever taking it back.
Yeah.
We take it back to 50%. It's probably gonna stay.
At some point in time, you probably will need to make that up. At some point in the future, yes, you will. It's just like solid waste. You know, the commission took a penny away from solid
Hey, I'm
waste
just
several
asking,
years
is there
ago,
a projection-
and now it's
is
having
there
to.
a projection of when we're gonna be, I mean, like Commissioner Wheeler said, you know, we had to do that at that point in time. Is there a projection of when we'd be looking at something like that again?
You're asking me just for an opinion. Okay. Given their deficit spend, $4 million, and their fund balance restriction, back up, it would be probably FY '25, maybe FY '24, when you would
Okay,
have to do
I just
something.
wanna know how sustainable
Yeah.
it was to what, you know, before we were in the situation again of having to make a
Right,
choice.
right. FY '24, FY '25.
Thank you, sir.
Where were we? We're on the general fund. Let's see. Yep, okay. And then we've got a slight reduction. The other big item is probably a slight reduction in our state and federal prisoner board, as Chief Lightning and Sheriff Graybill can attest to. Some of those folks have been pulled out of our system, and we're not expecting to have the same revenue that we've budgeted for in the past. On the expenditure side, our current budget this year is $44.9 million in the current year. Things that were in that budget that were one time, of course, again, was the state CARES Act funding of $1.9 million. You'll recall I mentioned that we transferred money to solid waste. That's the $150,000. You'll recall that you made a contribution to the Boones Creek Historical Trust of $50,000. That's not recurring. So what we've done is we've pulled out those non-recurring one-time expenses from FY '21, which then takes us, which is about $2.3 million. And then you see what our FY '22 changes are. Which the first line there is no salary increase, across the board salary increase for solid waste or Washington County General Fund employees. That's to be determined by you all. The employee insurance expense was going to take another $181,000. And then as you look down through there are, there's a request for, looking at, for the commissioner, mayor, for some legislative consultant work. And so, the rest of the stuff is, 5,000 here, 10,000. Election commissions looking at data processing equipment, which may be, I haven't talked to the administrator, but some of that may be grant funded. I will point out, because I think you've all heard, the election commission, we did, if I didn't mention this earlier, the election commission requested a 3% increase for their employees, and we actually had that in an early version of the budget. But in order to make it easier for you guys and for the process, we've pulled that 3% increase out of the election commission. So what you're seeing here is, there are salaries across the board, with the exception of, there's probably a few salary merit increases for some employees. But across the board, everybody's at the same pay rate they were last year.
What's that $36,000 legislative consultant again?
There's been some discussion about having somebody to help the county with legislative issues. And I'll leave that up to the budget committee to, discuss if it's.
You want to discuss that, Manuel? I think
You've got a
curious,
question?
I deferred to the mayor, but the mayor had come to us with that, but it, and I think it got approved to go into the proposed budget because of the presentation that he made. But if you all want to hear about that, I think that'd be a good idea, it's a good time to do it.
So generally, state legislature impacts the county in a very significant way. And we are represented only by the State Association of County Government. We also have representatives from State Association of County Mayors. They represent all counties from the Mississippi River to the Allegheny Mountains, and don't necessarily represent our interest in Northeast Tennessee. For a number of years, the municipalities in Northeast Tennessee have had a consultant and representative down there representing municipal government and their Tri-City legislative agenda, which they present each year. So this is an opportunity that we're splitting the cost with other counties in the region to have a voice with the legislature in Nashville that represents just us in this region, if we choose to do that.
I don't understand that legal advice, what you talk about. What you talk about.
No, it's not legal advice. It's a representative to work with the legislators in Nashville to support our local legislators that are working on legislation benefits Northeast Tennessee on projects. Yes, sir.
One thing that occurred to me, as we get into this, working with this money that we got from the federal government, one of the things the state, and of course the state's now dropped the idea that they would guarantee projects and they would handle the money for you. But they are still talking about matching money as being available. And the idea of having somebody down there that can help with the legislature, but also with these departments down there, to help us leverage that and get matching funds for some of this. We may be able to particularly they're emphasizing that they're gonna do that with water lines. And so if we've got a chance to double our money on that, that was one of the things that caught my attention, and I thought made this at least worthy enough to bring to you all to consider.
One thing that caught my mind is inflation. And the last number I saw for inflation was, I think, in April, year over year was 5%. How long can we stay behind the curve on inflation?
If it's 5%, it's going to be pretty quick.
That's what has me worried.
Yeah, I mean, it will be, and we've talked about this for years.
And I see what you're all doing, and I understand completely what you're doing, but if the inflation, gasoline, if wages, if groceries, if everything is going up 5% or maybe even more, there's going to come a day of reckoning, and that's what I'm worried about.
And I think it would affect the county as a whole, and.
It's going to affect everybody.
Right, and you look at new revenue sources or, increasing your current revenue sources.
Yeah.
It's just going to be hard for property tax growth or growth in the property tax base
Exactly right.
to offset that,
Exactly
you know.
right.
So, yeah, yeah.
And
I agree.
inflation's just out of our control, we have no
That's correct.
control. We just react.
Some other items, some other the FY '22 expenses that we're picking up, well, let me back up. Let's see, you know, we changed the contribution for the JCDEA on the TIF. It went from based on the assessment to based on the tax levy, which really changed, which was is going to be beneficial for Washington County. So we were able to reduce our TIF contribution budget by $115,000 for next year. Your special appropriations that have been recommended, which there's a schedule later on in here of that, have increased $277,000, and then you kind of see the rest of the things that we're hitting in there. All said and done, we're going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a $400,000 operating deficit on a $16.4 million beginning estimated fund balance, which would take us to $15,990, which is going to be a little short of where we need to be, as we alluded, as I mentioned earlier.
Can you go back on page real quick?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little more about that 155,969 second line from the bottom.
Okay. Yeah, if you'll look on, and you can actually follow along with me, if you'll look on page 20, let me find it. Started to bookmark it and didn't. 51. If you'll look on page...
23.
Well, actually starts 22, Mayor.
22.
Actually starts at the bottom of 21. But that's the other general administrative department. And what that consists of primarily, Commissioner Tester, is courthouse security personnel. The mayor's, as part of the courthouse security process, there's a $75,000 placeholder, if you will, for courthouse security, yet to be determined on how that's provided, but wanted to get that into the budget. And then we have right at $30,000 of budgeted money next year for your website and your social media platform stuff. And those were predominantly the biggest components of that. You'll see communication, which is landline communication, dropped, which is 307. It dropped $30,000, but that was really because of a reclassification to internet connectivity. Most of our CenturyLink bills were related to our voice over internet protocol, which were not copper lines, but internet. But now we've got, we've, as you know, we've moved to Bright Ridge for our internet backbone, and so their cost is actually a little lower, and it's budgeted down there at $26,000 in account 350. And those were the larger items that made up that 155.
What's 308 consultants?
308, well, that is a placeholder for consultants that may arise during the year, that if we needed, to hire somebody to do some more water line work, some other costs, and it's really just the ability, think of it as a contingency account, Commissioner Tester, would be the best way to look at that.
Thanks, sir.
Okay. Bless you. And so, again, like we mentioned, the general fund balance projection, of course, with those changes we were just covered, we're still looking at a slight deficit per our policy on our fund balance of $370,000, which I'm sure we'll figure out how to fix that between now and time you all vote on this. Your special appropriations, drop those on the screen. You should have those in your packet, so you can see where the 277 was actually invested. And of course, we always talk about this last, is that, for your county employees, that always comes up at the end of the budget process. And so what are we going to be able to fund in terms of salary enhancements for our employees? And so what you have here is for the general fund, we've calculated what a range would do from 2% to 4%, and what that would cost or what that would take in terms of resources. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, solid waste, those numbers are shown below there. So it's a full, for both solid waste and the general fund, at a 4%, it's a $750,000 resource requirement. At 2%, it's 339,000. So. That's solid waste. And we talked about local option, and of course that's, I wanted to give you a little background here. If you got your, if you've looked at the budget committee minutes, you've seen this graph, but this is, we're only talking about doing anything with the rural local option sales tax, and you can kind of see the trajectory that thing's been on through our collection month of May 21st. And always remember, as you look at these graphs, what we collect in May was actually what was sold in March. There's a two-month lag there if you're trying to tie it back to economic activity, which really means that people did a lot of shopping in November, not December, because you see that spike, which is actually, boom, 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 which is January's collections in the county, which would have had to be November sales, so I guess, we all just need to be thankful that Tennessee adopted online sales tax, especially our school systems, because we would have really, it would have, as you all know, it would not have been pretty for our municipalities or our school systems this last year. We did a projection of what this actually does to the schools, the Washington County schools revenue stream if we take the second half of the sales tax. In the last column, if you pull out that second half, which is of the school's total sales tax collections, 18% of that's coming from Washington County right now. The rest of it's coming from Jonesboro, from Johnson City, but 18% of it is coming from rural Washington County. And so if we're going to, take the second half and put it into the general fund, then essentially they would have 9% from the county. So what you see on the far right is a reduction essentially of about 9% of their budgeted number, their actual numbers that they've actually recorded, that we've actually recorded year to date. Of course, June is an estimated number at this point. Try to use the conservative 1.5 million. It could be, I wouldn't think it'd be less than that, but hopefully it'll be more. But if you take the actual numbers and you remove from that the 9% that we're talking about, or half of the local option sales tax, what you get is that far right-hand column. And you'll see that their actual sales tax collections in would be $16,764,000 compared to their budget of $16 million. So that is why that's there for that. And
Mix that number, bottom line, while have any effect on the current
Budget. That's correct. That's correct. All right. Mr. Chairman, sorry, I went about 13 minutes longer than I planned.
It was very informative, Mitch. We appreciate it. That was a good job. Very,
All right.
very enlightening. Thank you so much. We have any more questions for Mitch before we let him sit down a minute? All right. Mayor, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Chairman, the timeline moving forward, there is a Budget Committee meeting Wednesday morning to consider issues that this commission from this group may want to suggest or recommend or have the Budget Committee work on before Thursday night's called meeting to consider the budget. So I guess I would just ask, what direction would the group offer tonight to the Budget Committee on Wednesday for additional work, if any?
All right. With that being said, we'll open up the floor for any questions or discussion from the commission and share ideas or Commissioner Edens?
I'd like to see employee pay raises,
Okay.
seriously looked at and included.
All right. I know there were several there that Mitch had outlined for us going forward, the cost of each one of those. Was there a number there that you wanted them to consider more than others, Commissioner Edens, before? I think there was 1, 2, 3, 4. And I know the Highway Department was a separate number, I think.
The highest number presented in this package that I saw was 4%,
4%.
and I would be for that, if
Okay.
at all possible,
All right,
for our employees.
For all employees.
Yes, sir.
all right,
If possible, I'd like it looked at.
all right. Thank you, Commissioner Lott. 4%. Commissioner Wheeler?
I'd like that the budget committee member get some input from you all on the courthouse security. We talked this morning at our budget meeting about there's two ways to do this. And we'd be placing this money, where it's placed in the budget, would be to pay for private security. If we could always move that later if we wanted to go with the sheriff's department. But it would go ahead and authorize right now to go with private security. So I asked the question this morning, and the sheriff was with us this morning, and I see the chief this evening. But I asked about, well, would that private security person have the radio that can summon our sheriff's department immediately? Well, they don't. They go back through their home office, who then calls the sheriff's department to send somebody else to help. They also don't have the ability they can't arrest, they're not a certified law enforcement, I guess, in most cases. So my question to him was, what did he think of that? And he talked about pros and cons, but I think that might be something we want to go ahead and talk through, whether or not we feel like it ought to be a deputy over there, as opposed to, and of course, we would have to create a position, we would need to fund that. And the sheriff indicated he would handle that just like they do the bailiffs here, and it would just be another position that they would open up over there. But what do you all, my thought is I think that's a safer situation to be in, where the deputy's got a radio and can call, not call their home office, but they're calling, their own people to come help.
What'd she say? Huh? What's that?
So is your position you all would rather not do that?
No, sir, I haven't
process is going on right now to limit down all those entrances, including construction. And so that'll be somewhat limited. But right now, we only have one private security personnel there. So we have the same issue, I guess, with them. There was somebody there at one point. I don't know if they're. Right. Well, we can leave it right where it is, if that's what you want to do, or we can talk about it.
I think Mr. Page makes a good point. I think we need security there. It may be we have to do a private in the interim until we find the funding and the people for the sheriff to provide it. I feel like you, I feel a little uncomfortable, but, a private, person there is better than nothing.
Would it be possible if we could ask Commissioner Reedy to make comments from?
All I will say is, when it was a courthouse, not an administrative building, there was 2 entrances. And it was still a nightmare because you had people propping doors open, and we didn't have the accountability to stop those people from blocking doors open and letting people in who didn't know was there. One person cannot do that job, or there's not with problems that many entrances.
Commissioner Malone, did I see you with your hand up? Oh, I've done quite a bit of that tonight, so I understand completely.
I guess I will, I'll share, I think my preference.
All right.
From a functionality standpoint would be to have a sheriff's deputy there. But in the interim, until we can get there, it may be that it has to be private. I think the mayor said this morning that they are going down, I think, from 13 entrances down to 3, I think, all on what is considered, I think, the first floor, with then locks and security from kind of the back room office areas, so that those are not readily accessible. But it may be that we have to have private security until person, sheriff deputy can be hired. But I think long term, I would prefer to see the sheriff's deputy in that position.
Well, knowing the chief, I know she likes a set of good SOPs written for those positions. And it's important to find out exactly what the administration of that building wants. Sometimes we come in with an expectation of a law enforcement officer, and they come in with seeing it as a totally different way. So sometimes, if you don't have a good set of general orders laid out for that position and laid out there, it really makes it a lot easier for that man to flip that book open, and reducing the number of entrances would be tremendous there, because I worked in that building. I remember what Major Denny was saying about trying to keep the doors open. So I agree. It would, private security is great, but I think if we could work towards that, it would be good as well.
Chairman, brought up a bigger maybe not a bigger problem, but as big a problem. We gotta keep our doors shut. It sounds like
Absolutely.
we need to lock our entrances down. I mean, we're not the same society that we were years ago when people can do it, and I mean, we've got to have rules and regulations, and we have to hold people accountable that's working in that building to keep those doors shut. If they're not supposed to be, we still need our emergency doors and things like that. But I think that's something that we should be working on now. I mean, we can control how many doors is open, now. So I guess, how do we go about that? That doesn't cost any money. 'Cause we're going to have, we may need 13 police officers to monitor 13 doors if we don't.
Well, I think I could let the mayor answer this one, but I think our answers will be close to the same. You kind of got a fire marshal problem too. You gotta make sure that's good. And sometimes you have to do some construction work and do some door restriction and then I remember Captain Denny oftentimes at that time, he he had a policy, if you could bring those door chalks to him, he paid a premium for those. And, if you eventually, all the door stops disappeared, there was nothing to stop the door with. Now I hate to tell that story on him, but it's a true story. But like you said, until you're able to stop blocking those doors,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't get it. I understand fire marshals and things like that. I
Absolutely.
understand that. But it sounds like, somebody just opened a door for whatever reason. Well, cameras are cheap, and sometimes managers have to be managers and hold people accountable, and this is a security issue. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying, I'm serious about it. I'd like to see a deputy there. I'm very comfortable with our training and the personnel we have and those kind of things. Love to see that there. But if we don't get serious about that, it just looks good. It makes us feel good to have that officer there. But if we're not securing the doors and the things that we can take care of, in my opinion, we're just kidding ourselves. And we could start locking doors, I think, tomorrow. But, so I'd like to see something done about that before we really get, so 2 days when we get serious about budget time or 3 days on Thursday. But to me, that's something that that was a great point about the doors, and sounds like that was an ongoing problem then, and may even be a bigger problem now. So,
I think I spoke to that from a courthouse point of view at that time, and that's what it was. We had several enhancements there as well. When it was a courthouse, we had metal detectors, deputies at each station. We had many of those doors locked down unless you come through a metal detector. And, a lot of the employees and many of the members of the public that was coming to court, security is an inconvenience. And managers as well, employees, and oftentimes members of the public, see it as that. And so you have to balance that, I think, as a manager, as to how much security, oftentimes an environment can stand sometimes. So it's
To me, if it's safety, it's a safety.
absolutely,
And there's some things with safety, it's just that.
it is. I know Mayor Eldridge worked on this for a long time, this very problem, and I know that was kind of handed off to Mayor Grandy, and he's also been looking for solutions over there, and they're hard to find. Mayor, do you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, if you don't mind, this process for the enhanced security for the courthouse has been also really carried some progress. I think that we work hard to enhance it. The fact of the matter is, it's a 8-year-old building that has 13 doors to the outside. And so in this courthouse is a very active commercial building. Daily, there are hundreds of people who transact business of one sort or another. And most of that takes place, of course, on the first floor with register of deeds, trustee, and the county clerk. So the entrances will be to guide all outside guests to the first floor, where they'll be stopped and will not be allowed to move to other places in the building. That'll include the assessor's office, where all the entrance will be to what is now our ADA compliant entrance. They've taken that office, for example, completely reversed the entrance system, so that the counter, if you see vendors come in and all that is off of that hallway, there at the ADA entrance. Folks coming in using the ADA entrance to go to the first floor or any other place in the building will only be able to access the first floor. That's where this security person is critical, because to get anywhere else in the building, the person has to gain access from that person, essentially being clear to move upstairs to legal, accounting, or whatever else is up there. So that's the plan for the security, but the key really is that security individual. So there are cameras that have been added in there recently. We'll send care of cameras and monitors in two places. If that security person has to step away for lunch or some other reason, then Sherry has the ability to grant access visual, being able to see the person visually on a TV monitor to set the food. Otherwise, it would be escorted. So it's not ideal, it's actually very challenging to try to convert an old building to modern security standards. This is an effort that's been going on, and a lot of people have looked at it and have security background. This is the plan going forward. It will not be foolproof with people in the building that apply, but generally it will provide a different, higher level of security than what we've experienced in the past. I think it would give a level of comfort, particularly to those people that are on the first floor, having a security person there. Ideally, it would be the sheriff, Mr. Wheeler, the placement of where that money is in the budget is not as important as having it in the budget in order to be able to pay for somebody to perform that task once the project is complete.
Anything else, Commissioner Davenport? All right. Commissioner Jones?
Just ask the Budget Committee to help clarify for me some issues around this change in the local option for the rural sales tax and the school funding. And maybe, Mitch, you can help me out with a couple of these things. When you got to the end and talked about our fund balance, I mean, our fund balance, you know, this is where I'm guessing the concern is, and in terms of being a little short of where it needs to be, is what you said. And, you know, we want our fund balance to meet some, you know, minimum amount, obviously. And the impact of that reallocation of the local option sales tax for the rural parts of the county would affect the fund balances of our schools. So at stake here is 3 different fund balances and, you know, where we go. So first, I'd just like to know what, when you say we're a little short of where we need to be can you be a little more specific, and what's the rationale for the target number that we're shooting for? I actually have a series of questions, so that's the first one. Do you want me to keep going, or maybe give me the short answer and I'll come back to it if I,
As I alluded to on the Commissioner Character's question, I believe, on restricted accounts, we have a fund balance policy on the general fund, which requires us to maintain in reserves 4 months' worth of operating expenses. Okay? And that's what gives rise to our, the restriction. I'm looking for the page number, Commissioner Jones. Page 3 of the really short handout, the second slide. That's what gives rise, we've got $16.3 million of restrictions on $15.9 million of estimated fund balance, okay? 40% of the operating expense plus, I think it's $1.9 million in restricted reserves that we have on the books. So that $370,000 is the fund balance shortfall that we need to cover to comply with our own internal policy.
That's if we do this.
And that is including the recording revenue of over $3 million in the general fund from the local sales tax option, from the local option sales tax.
Without it,
Without,
that'd be
oh,
3.3.
yes,
So it's
exactly,
huge.
yes.
so wait, say it, without it, we would be where?
$3.4 million in the hole.
We would be $3.4 million short of our own sort of internally set policy around how much money we need to have in our fund balance.
Correct. But our own internally set policy was based on best business practices to determine what a reserve balance
sure,
should
fair
be
enough.
for the general fund.
But that's certainly something the bond rating agencies look at.
Exactly, yes. Thank you,
And
Commissioner Malone.
as Commissioner Malone just pointed out, that's before any raises. Okay, so another question I have, and again, like, that helps me a lot. So obviously, we're shooting for something here, and we're short. My next question is, you know, the city and the town each give 50% of their local option to the schools, so they keep the other 50%. But I don't think they keep 100% of their half. Am I right about that?
They give 50% of their local option to their schools. We give 100% of our local
Right.
option to the schools.
So they keep 50%,
Right.
but then they give some of that, they give some of their 50% also to the schools as well, like 25% or something.
I think,
Of their 50%.
well, if you're referring to Johnson City, and I haven't seen their budget for this year, but they do budget, and Commissioner Carragher can certainly address this, but they do make a direct appropriation from their general fund, whether it's coming from sales tax or property tax or, business tax, who knows? But that's the benefit, it's a good thing for the city that they're able to do that and supplement their educational resources with, $9 to $12 million a year in additional funding.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, what is the potential impact? You sort of have played it out for the county a little bit in one of these slides, the county schools. I guess I would like in your budget meeting for you to hear from our school folks about how they view this playing out over a year or 2 or 3 in their budget scenarios. I mean, we have to weigh out it's the pros, cons of them losing some of their fund balance when, they set standards for their fund balances versus us losing out in our fund balance when we have standards for our fund balances. And so, what's the 2-3 year projection for them in terms of the impact? And this was a pretty late breaking opportunity or decision or creative way of solving a problem here that's, I appreciate the work that went into thinking through a creative option, a way to make this work without raising taxes. But it didn't provide opportunities for all of us to communicate about how that will play out for everybody. So for me to feel good about, I'm not going to feel good about anything, right? Because it's money that we're moving around here. But for me to understand and feel like a good dialogue occurred, I would like the budget committee, when they meet, to at least discuss and have a good understanding of how this will impact the schools' budgets. So when we make a decision on Thursday, if we can make a decision on Thursday, that's all available to us.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, we don't receive the Johnson City Schools budget. I mean, we're not their funding body. So to answer your question would take some information from the schools, and, we would be projecting something that's really totally out of our, out of my wheelhouse. So I'm not real sure how we get there. Not that it's not a good idea, I'm just not sure that I've got a magic button that I can hit and make something happen.
Well, I think just a dialogue with them and kind of what's your perspective on how this will impact your budget over the next few years. And then you bring that back. There's nothing magic about it. It's a challenging financial situation, and we just need to know what the challenges look like here versus there, and, weigh out those different scenarios.
Commissioner, if I might just tag along with you. The problem is our property taxes will not keep pace with inflation. So the question becomes, how do you fund that gap? And that's the question this body's going to have to find an answer to.
Well, we had the same question last year, and we found $2 million, which apparently we didn't end up needing. Here we are again.
Well, that was a short run, and this one we're talking about is a short run solution. What we need to be thinking about is what's the long run solution. And I think that really is going to involve a lot of conversation next year.
Well, or should it involve that conversation this year?
Well, you don't have a whole lot till the fiscal year ends and the new one starts, so I'm not sure what we can do, but it is a question we really need to have a lot of thought and debate about, and the finance committee has got a big job ahead of it next year.
Mitch, how many pennies did you say it would take up to make that difference in?
It would be like 10.3 cents on the property tax to,
But now, Mitch, that's prior to any adjustment for raises, right? Then when you throw in the additional
That's correct.
funds for raises,
That's
you're
correct.
adding another 2 or 3 pennies.
correct.
So really, to plug the hole, if you were to do it with a property tax increase, it would take, with a pay raise, it
13,
would take 12 or 13 pennies.
it would.
With inflation, you'll be on the same place next year.
One of the things that we need to think about too is, we've spent a lot of time in the last 3 years talking about growth and talking about trying to, and that's a ship that's slow to turn around. And so one of the things we're, you know, it's not a matter of just looking at revenue or, you know, the budget committee and you all have helped. We've looked at, you know, cutting expenses. We've cut a good bit of expenses in the last 3 years. And we always need to be thinking about working smarter and finding ways to do that. But I don't think there's any way, nobody's proposed this, and I don't think there's any way you can find $3 million in cuts to make in this budget. You know, so you either got to increase revenue somehow, cut expenditures somehow, and when we look at increasing revenues, you know, growth and a tax increase are basically the two ways to do that down the road. But to me, this you know, I agree it's short term. I think we have to keep plugging at what we're trying to do, growth, constantly. One of the things, the only reason that I voted to bring forward Monday night, this idea about, that I've come up with on the remote workers, you know, I've got issues with that idea, but I felt like we ought to all talk about it because it's more of a short-term growth project, and we don't have very many of. So I thought it was at least worth our discussing, to talk about what can we do to spur. If we don't do that, fine, but what do we do to spur some short-term growth while we're waiting for some of this long-term work we're doing to kick in. But I think that, you know, we, in the meantime, you know, we've got to decide whether we're going to, you know, how we, you know, that's not a budget committee decision, in my opinion. That's a, you know, we've made a recommendation of how to do this year, but if you all want to talk about, you know, other sources of revenue, then the whole commission needs to talk about it. Same thing with the raises. We only heard from one commissioner. We'd like to hear from more of you all, you know, what you want to talk about on raises. Are we looking, if we're going to try to do 4%, which has been suggested, then that we know we need to go back and fill that 750,000 part of the whole too. And we can work on suggestions to do that, and those two can certainly help us with that. But we need to know where you all stand on that. The same thing about, if we want to do something other than this proposal, then we need to be told, you know, start looking at whatever that is.
Commissioner Jones?
So, I mean, just because I've never seen it done before, what has to happen to, to go forward with a property tax increase? Do we just like say it shall be and choose a certain amount and vote on it here and then it goes into effect?
Yeah, it's pretty much, it's, this commission sets the tax levy.
You know, I'm not personally afraid to bring that topic up. We went through this last year. It was a tough conversation. I brought it up last year. This county is an amazing place, and it's worth investing in. Our people are worth paying a fair wage, and I would be all for a property tax increase that improves our employee pay rate, that solved the problem we're having with our reserve or our fund balance without hitting up our schools. And frankly, I would love to see it raised enough to pay our Washington County school teachers what our city school teachers get paid. So that's my position on solving this issue. And it's not a fiscally conservative position, and it may not be a popular position, but that's where I stand on it.
Commissioner Kate?
With the reserve that the, if I understand this, but the school board has, if they want to raise their employees another 4%, they can run out somewhere around, I believe, $700,000, $800,000. They've got the reserve to do it if they want to do it. It's still coming back to us.
Well, they would still come back to us,
Yeah,
modify their budget.
yeah, yeah. But I'm talking about the money.
The Budget Committee considered this proposal that we brought to them to bring to you, to share with you. based on what we view as the total budget for Washington County, which is close to $160 million. And, I felt like it was our responsibility to bring to you an opportunity to adjust funds within that $160 million, half of which, of course, is, more than half of which, of course, is the schools budget. So looking at funds across the county, there's a fund that is sufficiently funded that, in the school system, and there's a fund in the general fund of Washington County that is in need of support. So balancing funds across the county, to me, is what I should be doing, bringing to you an opportunity to balance those funds without asking the citizens of Washington County to pay any additional tax revenue. You can allow funds to move in whatever direction you want to. You can allow funds to grow. It's been our position in the past to utilize available money before we go ask our citizens for additional funds. And, is that a process you can do forever? No. But using the funds that we have available to balance the budget is what we have presented, for this group to consider. Now, there's all the other options out there, including, property tax changes and other things. But this is a proposal that doesn't contemplate a tax increase for this year, and does have all funds fully compliant with their needs. We do in Washington County have the lowest property tax rate of any county, in northeast Tennessee. When you consider a number of other counties, if they have a lower initial property tax rate, it's offset by a substantial wheel tax, which is a revenue generator. So when you take those factors into consideration, we, in one of the finest counties in Tennessee, do have the lowest property rate in northeast Tennessee today.
Yes, Commissioner Malone?
This looks odd if I may, I think this builds on something Commissioner Carriger said, and maybe responds to Commissioner Jones. If property taxes are increasing roughly 1% a year, and this is about 1 to 1.2% per year, that doesn't cover inflation. And so property taxes alone are not going to be adequate to cover the inflationary costs of expenses. And so, in theory, we would have to raise property taxes every year. We would constantly be chasing inflation in property taxes. And so, from my perspective, what the proposed change relative to the local option sales tax does is it fixes, well, it partially fixes a structural problem with Washington County's budget. I don't recall what was anticipated or what was planned 30 years ago when they made the change, but I don't think that they intended for that change to be in perpetuity, which is really what we've lived with for 30 years. I think it was to fix a budget issue that year, and yet it stayed that way. Washington County is the funding body. That's where the revenue, in theory, should come to. And then it gets dispersed out based on the need and based on the requirements for maintenance of effort. I mean, obviously, the school system has a maintenance of effort where you're essentially guaranteed a 1% increase over time as long as student populations increase. So, from my perspective, the change with the local option unless we're content to raise property taxes pretty much every year. And I don't think you could find that sentiment here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Commissioner Ford?
I'd like to remind the commissioners, you know, we did not have a tax increase, but we had property reassessment. Mine went up $300 and some this year. And I hadn't had any buildings, nothing, but because my property, they said the value went up $40-some thousand. My taxes went up over $300. Now, that's a tax increase to me. I don't care how you cut it. If you're paying more, that's a tax increase. So I just need you to keep that in your mind too.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further discussions or observations? Any more observations on the employee raise? I mean, that was something that Commissioner Edens brought up. I know Commissioner Wheeler would like to hear more about our thoughts on that. My thoughts is, I agree with Commissioner Edens. As we look at that and try to press forward, I do commend the school board. They have included a 4% raise for their people, and I'm glad to see that. Teachers have had a tough year, and I appreciate that you saying those words, Mr. Irvin, because I was about to get to my point. When you look back into those numbers, and like Mr. Irvin said, that those numbers are coming out of the fund balance. As we think about it, how do we make up those numbers next year? Because that's a reoccurring number. And just like we're talking about here today, that money would come out of fund balance. So as we start to look at that, I mean, next year, if we're reducing the contribution to that fund balance, I mean, Mitch, you may have to help me here a minute, because I just have a question. If we're reducing the path you showed us in reduction, does that include the $3 million out of that money?
You're talking about on the school's fund balance or?
Out of the school's fund balance?
Yeah, now, go back to Commissioner Eden's question, how long would you be able to do that?
Yes.
And it's, FY '24, you've got maybe 2, 3 next year, and maybe 2 years after that, given the current numbers, and if you've got another 4% next year, it actually would accelerate.
So to make up that $3 million, that's, no growth.
Which is not what we see. I think it's important to point out that a couple of things. One, the school system's budget that has that 4% increase was approved by the budget committee. It's not a matter of just, that's county money sitting in that fund balance. That's money that's been, we've had a part in that. It's not just, with all due respect to my friend Mr. Urban, it's not just the school board doing that. And we're recommending to you all that we approve a 4% increase in the school systems. We have got as much interest in their fund balance staying strong as anybody. And when you look at it, their fund balance grows even without this growth. We're taking this basic growth that's not even been budgeted, Now, do we know what's gonna happen with sales tax? Is it gonna continue to increase? You know, we don't have any way of knowing that. But we do know we're gonna have low growth in the property tax for the next at least several years. And if sales tax continues to increase, you know, this will be able to be sustained a little bit longer. Anything we talk about here, if we try to talk about current numbers, is not sustainable. The county budget's not sustainable at the current revenues. You know, you've got to have growth or more income coming in if you have inflation of any sort. And that's the same thing with their fund balance. You know, but at this point, if you saw the graph that shows the trend on sales tax, you know, it's continuing to trend up and has, not for a year during COVID, but for 3 years. So, you know, we're anticipating that growth to continue. If it doesn't, we'll have to make adjustments as we go. But the idea is, with where we are right now, with the growth that we're experiencing right now, that this is a way to balance the funds across the county without having to resort to a tax increase at this point. And if sales tax does continue to grow the way it's grown, that may be more sustainable than we're talking about when we're talking about where we are right now.
Commissioner Jones?
Just to reiterate my point earlier about hearing from the schools, and it sounds like you were just playing out the county school and its reserve balance, but I still want to hear about city school too, and how this would impact their fund balance. Because I feel like we know a little less about that. So.
Mayor, did you have something? All right. Anything else? Any further discussion? Mayor, do you have anything before we close? All right. Mitch, did you have anything?
Mr. Chairman, I said,
Yes, sir. All right. Anything else from any of the commissioners before we finish up here this evening?
Well, if I may, this only impacts the Washington County school system, but their fund grew last year from 10.4 million to 14.8. That was a 42% increase in their reserve. Had we implemented this change during the budget process last year, their general reserve fund would have grown from 10.4 to 13.1. It would have still grown. So while we are reducing the acceleration at which their reserve fund is increasing, based on even what Mitch showed us tonight, their reserve fund should still increase. Thank you, Mr.
Do you think that the school system thinks that these sales tax numbers are sustainable over long term? You know, I was listening to the city commission meeting the other night, and one of the things that Mr. Peterson said, and he continued to tell the city commission, was about these unsustainable sales tax numbers, or not to over budget thinking of those sales tax numbers. And I am concerned about that as well. So he brought that point up at the city commission meeting the other night, and I was interested to hear that, because they do make up a large number of that sales tax money.
Actually, this is only rural sales tax.
Yes, I was talking about their sales tax money. I wasn't talking about their overall, just budgeting sales tax. I didn't know how that,
Well, and rural sales taxes the trend in the rural sales tax would look much different than if you were looking at a trend in Johnson City's sales tax. And our sales tax has been increasing where theirs at a rate certainly higher than if they are increasing, much higher than what they're increasing at.
oh, okay.
So I think that's the difference, and I heard or read about what you were saying, that you heard, and I think that there may be a difference there, based on location, quite frankly.
All right. I guess that was my question, is that, was there a difference in the prediction, I guess? Commissioner Huffine?
So, something that might bring some clarity to this, Mickey, you alluded to 2 years, 3 years, we're not sure, but. And then, if I go back to Commissioner Malone's comment, it would have still grown $3 million ballpark. Can you work maybe with Brad, whatever, and give us, based on the current trends we see right now, what this impact will be in true dollars over the next 3-5 years? Will we add $3 million next year, have to take 4 out, so it's $1 million we're losing, but give us about a 5-year projection so that we're doing a little long-term planning and we're being a little more strategic. I think that would probably help all of us see the pathway, and I think that's really our key. We're trying to balance this budget, and that's the trap everybody falls into. You balance this year, and we'll worry about next year. Well, next year's going to be here really quick. If we have some understanding, then we can start working toward that, and then that'll help us work even closer with the school board, because we know the saws we're going to have in the future. Is that a fair request? Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Jones?
Thank you all for working so hard on this. We appreciate it.
Yes, thanks to the Budget Committee. They have worked very hard, and Mitch and the mayor and his staff for getting this together. All right. Do you have anything else to consider before we adjourn until not adjourn, but complete our workshop? All right. So there will be a Budget Committee meeting in the morning, Commissioner Wheeler, is that right?
We are.
So in the morning,
Yes, sir.
in the morning, Wednesday at 9 a.m. And that'll be at the courthouse. All right. All right, until Thursday, that's when we'll meet again here at 6 o'clock in a special session to consider budget items. And we'll see you Thursday.